look at this little period here and think, well, this is when the restructuring is going on in YWAM. I actually think that as a mission, we've always been struggling with how to do the job better, how to serve our people better, how to open for the flow so things can flow better. And then as we grow, that demands changes. And I think probably what's happened is we've been a little bit more verbal about sharing all those concerns with the whole mission the last few years. So the perception is a specific time of change, but it's not a time of crisis or revolution or when we're overturning everything. It's that gradual development. We don't want to become solidified into something that doesn't fit today's situation or what we are now. And so we're working towards just being the best we can. And the Matrix was a part of that several years ago when we inaugurated it. And now I think the general trend right now is towards decentralization or reaffirming the lack of centralization which we've really always had as a mission, emphasizing the autonomy and decision-making freedom that local ministries have, opening it up to new initiatives, trying to create an atmosphere where initiative is encouraged in spite of our size. So those are the sort of the, and in the midst of all that, as we grow, to make sure that our people have the pastoral covering and the care that they need, and that we really are producing servant leaders. So those are sort of the issues that we wrestle with. Now the role of president comes into that. And one of the things that you'll see reflected in this new role is that it's for a limited term. That's really never been the case before with any of our leadership positions. So in a sense, that's part of the decentralization. Spread it around a little bit, get some more participation. It's not to be a management position per se. In other words, I'm not going to be studying the national plan for Togo and telling them what modifications to make in it. I'm not going to be going to YWAM in Europe and telling them they have to increase their students by 20% in the next 3 years or something. Those kinds of things in YWAM happen on a local, regional level, and the further down it is, the better we feel about it. So the presidential role is not a managerial role, it's a leadership role. My primary concern is with sensing from God and from what's happening around the world, what kinds of directions God wants to take the mission in, and giving that trumpet call and sort of nudging things that way, or leading out that way, and trying to get things moving.
With all the decentralization, though, will you not need some kind of a president's office, a staff, a team around you to help serve you to do what you've been called to do?
Yes, I will. Now, this is a bit of a problem because I live and work in Brazil and I don't plan on moving. But with the email and the technology that we have now, I can check in with our Target 2000 office in London, for example, 2 or 3 times a day if I want to. I don't want to, but I could. And so I have people around the world that are used to working with me who have offered themselves to help. And so it's kind of a presidential office on internet kind of a thing that we're working on. It's hard for me to keep English-speaking staff in Brazil because they feel so isolated and distant and cut off. But it hasn't been a big problem really, because if I can get into the magazines with a column or an article through email. I can. They're sending a letter out to all the bases out of Harpenden for me now that I wrote, but they've printed up there and sending out. So I'm getting a lot of help that way. I think we can do it without a big central bureaucracy.
Is there something of a statement, too, in the fact that you will be based out of Brazil, the third world situation?
Well, in my mind and heart it is. I think it's very important as we move into the next century that our mission neither be perceived as nor have the nature of a mission rooted in the Western world, based on Western world's values and culture. We need to truly internationalize, and we've been doing that, and I hope that trend continues and increases. We should have about 60% of our workers from non-Western countries.
You mentioned being, as the president, making the trumpet call to the mission. Are there any particular calls that you want to sound, that you have on your heart?
Well, I have three things on my heart. One is this whole issue of internationalizing, of growing numbers of YWAMers from Indonesia, from Korea, from Brazil, from Argentina, from, Nigeria, from Senegal, from Uganda, from India. And we need to encourage that. We don't need to be paternalistic. The answer isn't in some kind of reverse discrimination. We don't need to tell an American he can't be a leader in Asia. But we do have to encourage an atmosphere and environment where people from the third world feel encouraged to take initiative, to fulfill their calling, to make their voice heard. And so I think we're moving along pretty well, and maybe we can do better. I don't really have a handle on how to do that, but the other area is the area of the unreached peoples of the earth. This particular decade, the first half of it, has been a good growth period for YWAM after a bit of flattening out in the ages. The only exception to that is that our staff numbers haven't grown inside the 1040 window. To me, that could still be a question of time. God builds in layers. It's natural that he would build us first in the countries where we have a pool of potential workers and resources, and he builds on that and he builds on it. But if we don't now move out towards actually placing people amongst the unreached and build our numbers towards the unreached, then we'll miss it. And so we're blowing a major trumpet call in that sense right now. And I'll be writing a personal letter to every base and challenging them to adopt at least 2 unreached people groups. I would very much like to see Youth with a Mission engaged in 1,000 unreached people groups by the end of the year 2000. And I don't think it's a difficult goal, but it's achievable. And so we're aiming at that and doing everything we can to push it. I believe that every ministry in YWAM, whether they see themselves as primarily frontiers or not, has a role to play in reaching the unreached. It's a part of our history as a mission. It's a part of the words of the Lord that have come to us at key times, like in the Philippines or at the Red Sea when we were, leadership was gathered there, or even in Switzerland now, and we put out a statement about it. So it's something that's definitely on God's heart, and we need to make sure that we don't miss God on it. And the third area is a little harder for me to verbalize, but I feel it very deeply, and that is, I would say, challenging our mission and everyone in it towards devotion and dedication to the Lord and to the task. There's been some debate as to whether our priority is to the task or whether it's to our people, and to me that's a false dichotomy. I cannot see people being satisfied if they're not doing anything useful with their lives. So if you go onto a base where there's no definition of goals, there's no sense of mission, you understand what I'm saying, then you find low morale and high turnover and all sorts of bad things. On the other hand, you'll find in places too young leaders who are very ambitious to build a name for themselves, to get something done, and they'll just, massacre their people pursuing that. Well, they don't get the task done because nobody will stay with them because they burn out. And the people that only take care of their people and don't have a sense of task don't get it done either because of the reasons I've cited. So it has to go together. Mm-hmm. But the way Jesus put it was, he that loves his life in this world will lose it. So if we exist as a mission just to make each other happy, we're not going to do it. But he that loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will find it. Now that's the way we have to go as youth of the mission. We have to give our lives away to the needy of the earth. And in doing so, I really believe we'll find our own well-being, almost as it were, accidentally. But we have to have that devotion for his sake and for the sake of the gospel, to him and to the task.
Is that something you found easy to do in your own life? You carry many responsibilities: Portuguese-speaking ministries, Brazil national leadership, frontier missions, and now president. Is it easy to blend that dedication and devotion?
Well, Andy, I tell you the truth, I haven't found much of anything easy in missions. When we went to Brazil, everybody thought it was impossible, and they were probably right. But just because it's not easy doesn't mean it's not good. And so you have to decide where the good lies and then put forth the necessary effort to get there. So I wouldn't characterize it as easy, but I would characterize it as wonderful.
You arrived in Brazil just with your wife and no support, nearly 20 years ago, and now Brazil's one of the largest national works. How do you explain the phenomenal growth?
Well, the first explanation, first let me just say, probably there was never a missionary couple in all of history that had less prospect of being successful. We got to Brazil with $50 a month support. We wouldn't even pay the tithes of what we needed to put out every month for language study and our room and board. And so God sustained us supernaturally. You know, I remember one Friday I went down to the post office, and here's a letter from an ex-student of mine. I didn't even know him very well. I'd been his teacher in Bible school. He says, I found this money when I was in my job in the airport, and nobody claimed it, so it's mine now, and I asked God, and he told me to send it to you today. Do you think I heard his voice? Well, this was a Friday, and I needed to pay our room and board that day, and I needed $100, and it was $100. And that sort of thing happened all the time. And then we started including the Brazilians, and it got worse. Total impossibilities all the time, over years. But all the struggle tempered the people that were with us, and tempered them and tempered them. And through the grace of God. You wouldn't want to try to do it without the grace of God. Much prayer, seeking the Lord. And out of that, we just got wonderful people. The real secret to the multiplication is the caliber of people that God's given us amongst the Brazilian YWAMers.
You've also championed Latin missionaries going out into all the world. How did that develop?
Well, I felt that we really needed something to help people break out of habit and take initiative in new directions. You see, Brazil has no missionary tradition. And as I reflected on that and prayed, the way I saw to do it was to do an LTS. Only I would do the LTS aimed at showing a person from the beginning to the end of the school how to take a vague, fuzzy vision and make it into a ministry. That's my goal. Well, we're in the middle of it. One of the young men came to me. He said, Jim, you're going to like my project. Now, Lauren had been through, and he mentioned there were 2 countries YWAM never been to. One was São Tomé e Príncipe, right off of the African coastal little island country. He said, I'm going to form a team. I'm going to take them to São Tomé e Príncipe. I said, well, Hobson, that's a communist country. They don't let missionaries in. I know. It's very, very poor. There's sometimes no food. I know. There's no medical care in that country. I've been doing a little research myself since Lauren had mentioned it. He says, I know to everything I said. And I said, well, then what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to get a team and I'm going to go there. And he did it. His name was Hobson Suárez. And he really broke the barrier of unbelief. And he took a team out there, and they started churches and made breakthroughs spiritually and everything. And other people got encouraged by his example. And out of our base in Belo, since 1989, we've started 11 new bases in countries that have no YWAM bases.
It's tremendous. Mm-hmm.
And that's without any subsidizing from the West or anything. It's based right out of the Brazilian church.
Did you always want to be a missionary from being a young boy?
No, our family wasn't Christian at all. Well, my dad, he was a deacon in a church whose denomination I won't mention here, but it was a liberal church. See? And no belief in the Bible or anything. So I had no concept of even being born again. But when I was 15, by then my dad had abandoned us and we were on our own. I stayed with a friend to work on a cattle ranch over the summer, and they took me to church. And I had an encounter with the Lord that summer, my 15th year. By the time I was 17, you see, Andy, I'm a little spiritually retarded. I have a terrible time seeing a vision or having a dream that means anything or hearing a voice. I have to really work on it to know what God wants. And so it sort of grew in my heart over time. But by the time I was 17, I was sure that what God wanted me to do was be a missionary. I wasn't sure whether that was what I wanted to do, but that seemed irrelevant to me.
When did it become something you did want to do?
There are days now when I don't want to do it. But I have to say, I must be one of the most fulfilled people in the world. It's wonderful to do God's will, irrespective of what your own desires are. And then after you've passed through things and you look back, you see that it not only was the right thing to do, but it was the most fulfilling and often the most entertaining thing you possibly could have done.
Did you have a happy childhood?
Well, Andy, I did until I was about 10. Yeah. I was born club-footed, so I had surgery when I was 6 months old and surgery when I was 4 years old. But that didn't bother me much when I was growing up. We lived in the northern Sierra Nevada range, extreme northeastern California. It was sort of far west stuff. They had the last Indian Wars in our county, 1914, Captain Jack and the U.S. Cavalry, you know. And so the values were sort of Louis L'Amour, you know. And it was a happy childhood. But then when I was 10, we moved down to the desert, and my parents in Utah, and then my parents' marriage came apart, which was total shock. And the next several years was a terrible struggle for my mom, and I had to go in and have surgery again, and this time it affected me far more. They did bone fusion and things that left me sort of crippled for several years. And we were poor, and my dad wasn't around. And so it was a hard time. It really started recovering when I found the Lord.
And was that a long process for you of healing, or?
Well, it's a funny thing that nobody talked about healing back then. I never thought of it as a healing process, really. There's the anesthetic of time, you know, and I never really thought about it much. And then I came to the Lord, and my attention was attracted to other things, and I formed good friends with other Christians. I think I only put a punctuation point or a period on that whole time of my life after I came into YWAM. One day I was asking God if there was anything in my heart that didn't please him, and he said, yes, there is. I said, well, what would that be? He said, you've never forgiven your father. So I prayed there and forgave my dad. It was a little walk-in closet I'd set aside to pray in at my first YWAM house. You know how hard it is to be alone sometimes. I'd found this place and I fixed it up. I prayed there all by myself, and it made a tremendous difference in me, which was surprising to me. I didn't think it was a problem. And 3 months later, I got a letter from an uncle of mine, my dad's brother, who was also had become a Christian in those years, describing the conversion of my father. I really believed that something happened in the heavenly places when I forgave my father. I know that it wasn't a coincidence. Mm-hmm. And since then, we've become good friends.
You're a family man?
Yes. Pam and I were married 21 years ago in Hawaii. She's a Hawaiian girl from the Portuguese community in Oahu. And within the first year of our marriage, we moved down to Brazil. And since then, we've had 3 children biologically, and we've adopted 2 others associated with some of our children's ministries and things. We've picked out 2. So we have 5 kids.
Where do you live?
I live in the city of Belo Horizonte. No one's ever heard of it, but it's a city of about 4 million people. Sits in the triangle between Brasilia, Rio, and São Paulo in southeastern Brazil. We live right on the base with about 350 Brazilians.
What does Jim do when he's not being president or director or running something?
Oh, I have a lot of things I like to do. I like to take my sons and go up into the Amazon and go fishing. I like to, I play tennis usually 3 times a week. I swim 3 times a week. I like to read books. I'm a voracious reader. I like to watch sports. I play quite a little bit of soccer. I do a lot of things. I'm never bored in my free time.
In all your travels, do you have any particular personal heroes, as it were, within Youth with a Mission who are out there in ministry?
Oh, I've got many of them. Because I spend a lot of time with teams right out on the front lines, the real stories of heroism and perseverance and strength in adversity that we have in Youth of the Mission, you find them out there in West Africa and South Asia and East Asia and places like that.
We've talked about an exciting future for Youth with a Mission. You're excited about the new role. What do you see to be some of the big issues that we need to address as a mission, perhaps individually as well, though, if we're to achieve all that you have in your heart?
Oh, boy. Well, I've mentioned most of those as we've gone along here, but one is we have to find a way to produce a whole new generation of visionaries, of risk takers, of people who will take initiatives. And in order to do that, we have to open things up. So structurally, if you boil it all down to one thing, to me, it's opening things up. It's giving permission to people to do things. Another thing that we have to solve is we have to know how to do the best job we can at taking care of our people. That includes organizing the tasks for them. It includes pastoral care. It includes a certain amount of discipline and accountability. It includes a lot of things. And we need to take good care of our people and to make sure that they have room to call on all of their potential and use it. Because turnover is a big problem. And we need to do what we can to develop long-term people.
As director of one of the 3 main threads of Youth with a Mission, evangelism and frontier missions, how do you see that weaving together with Mercy Ministries and training and education, the University of the Nations? How do those 3 come together?
Well, I think that in this whole thing, the exact definitions or exact descriptions are going to elude us, because it will be totally different if you're out somewhere in the middle of a civil war in Afghanistan than it will be in a Hispanic ghetto in Los Angeles, you know. I will say that it's very rare in YWAM for some ministry to be purely evangelism or purely mercy ministries or purely training. And I believe that's the way it should be. And I think it'll be all mixed together forever, and people should be encouraged to draw on everything they can.
Finally, Jim, if each YWAMer was able to come to you now and individually and say, Jim, how can we help you achieve all you want to during your presidency, in your president's role, what would your answer be to them individually?
Well, of course, I would deeply appreciate everyone's prayers, because it's a big responsibility. I'm not worried about it or you know, anxious or anything, but it is a big responsibility, and I respect it, see. And so I would really appreciate everyone's prayers. I would like to hear from you if you have concerns that you want to communicate to me. I'd like to hear from you. Also, there's the question of financing with any international leadership role in YWAM. If anyone around feels like they ought to contribute, that is a big help, because the budget I have to find, and it can be pretty heavy. I'm not complaining, not in a crisis, but I would appreciate any help that I can get.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.